Hello. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host, Gabe. This week we are talking about Chapter 13, The Very Secret Diary. So for our recap, the Christmas holidays are over, and because Hermione is going to have to spend several weeks in the hospital wing after the fiasco with the polyjuice potion in the cat hair, that was not Millicent Bulstrode's hair. The whole school now thinks she's been attacked, but she hasn't. Anyway, in this chapter, we see that after Madame Pomfrey kicked Ron and Hermione out, or Ron and Harry out from visiting Hermione one evening, they hear, this ruckus, and it's Filch, and he's having a fit because the corridor where the message on the wall is flooded again. So Harry and Ron decide to investigate, and they go talk to Moaning Myrtle. And she's upset because somebody attempted to flush a diary down Myrtle's toilet. And Harry picks it up, finds nothing wrong with it, although there is a name written on the inside on the first page, T.M. Riddle. Ron informs Harry that he knows the name because that was the name on the on the award for special services to the school that Riddle got. Because that was the one he burped slugs all over, and Filch made him polish it to within an inch of his life, basically. During that detention that Ron and Harry got from the Whomping Willow incident. So, chapter moves along, and Hermione finally leaves the hospital wing at the beginning of February. Professor Lockhart decides to celebrate Valentine's Day to kind of cheer everybody up with this whole Chamber of Secrets and nonsense. And at one point, Harry receives a singing telegram from one of the dwarfs that Lockhart brought in and dressed up as a Cupid. During which Harry realizes that the diary didn't have any ink on it from the broken bottle that happened during his skirmish with the dwarf, because he didn't want to listen to the singing message. And the dwarf says, "Stay still, you're going to hear this." So that evening, Harry investigates the diary closer because he noticed, wait a minute, my ink spilled all over everything else. Why is the diary perfectly clean? So he gets sucked into the diary. At least that's how it's written. And we end the chapter seeing what happened the last time the Chamber of Secrets was open. And that's why Tom Riddle got his special services to the school award. Because he laid it on Hagrid. So now, at this point, Ron and Harry are thinking Hagrid is the culprit behind this. So this week, we're going to go a different route. This is where I needed to have my ChatGPT tool to help me, because I didn't really connect with this, but I came up with a topic that I thought, that I think fits well here. So we're going to talk about the idea of obsessive rumination, intrusive thoughts, and journaling. But we're not really going to talk about journaling. We're mostly going to focus on the obsessive rumination and intrusive thoughts. So let's get into the psychology of this real quick. And as always, my references for my information are in the show notes. So real quick, rumination, intrusive, and intrusive thoughts are distinct yet interconnected psychological phenomena frequently discussed in mental health, specifically or especially for autistic people and those dealing with PTSD. So let's get into a definition of these two and, see how they're similar, see how they're different. Obsessive rumination refers to the repetitive and persistent stream of negative thoughts, frequently about past events, perceived failures, or about worries about the future. And this pattern often results in repeatedly dwelling on distressing feelings and their causes without reaching any sort of resolution. And it can feel mentally exhausting or paralyzing. In various mental health contexts, including OCD, depression, autism, and PTSD, rumination may be a core symptom that serves to reinforce cycles of anxiety and discomfort. Intrusive thoughts are unwelcome, involuntary ideas, images, or urges that are often upsetting or distressing and can become obsessions. These thoughts are commonly linked to several disorders such as OCD, PTSD, depression, and autism, and may sometimes include aggressive, sexual, or blasphemous themes. And their persistence and intensity can significantly impact daily functioning and emotional well-being. So, I asked the question to make sure that I understood this. So, in basically, yes. So, obsessive rumination. Obsessive rumination would be all of the negative thoughts that I have thought about myself because of the programming from my father's abuse, from his verbal abuse. I'm not good enough. I'm lazy. I'm stupid. I'm worthless. Blah, 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 blah. Those are obsessive rumination. Those are the ones that we tell ourselves, basically. Okay. Intrusive thoughts are, as the description I gave you said, involuntary. So this would be the constant replay of certain events surrounding my main trauma event. I could not stop those for the life of me. And that is why people who deal with PTSD that don't get the appropriate mental health assistance they need from the get-go typically find that they can't stop it. Their mind replays the events over and over and over again, no matter what the patient does, and why it is so common for people with PTSD, especially when they're not getting the help they need, to develop a substance abuse problem. Okay, and then of course the sleep disturbances and nightmares too, I would kind of throw into this. But for me, when I asked ChatGPT, do I understand the difference? It said yes, and these are the things that differentiate. So the obsessive rumination is more intentional. It's like, oh, I suck. I'm stupid. I'm lazy, blah, blah, blah. The intrusive are the ones that you can't control. That's a very, very, very basic distinction to show you the difference between the two. Both of them are a lot more nuanced, but you get the gist. That's what we're going for here. Oh, so these concepts set the stage for exploring how obsessive rumination and intrusive thoughts manifest specifically in autistic people with PTSD. Last week I was more inclusive on the information that I gave. This week we are speaking specifically about autism and PTSD because this is the only perspective that I personally know. Okay, so I don't mean to exclude anybody. I just don't know enough what it means to be ADHD or OCD or any of the other neurodivergent types. I don't know what it is to be that. So I can only speak from this one perspective. Okay, so, bear with me this week on this. I have been dealing a lot with those two concepts a lot, as we just discussed. And it's completely normal. I want you to understand that it is completely normal for those dealing with a variety of mental health issues. Again, specific to me, PTSD and being autistic. More specific to my case, I'd argue that maladaptive daydreaming, we're going to talk about that a little bit, is closely related, and the research shows this. Because maladaptive daydreaming was another one that I another concept, I guess, that popped into my head, and isn't the intrusive thoughts, isn't that maladaptive daydreaming? No, they're similar, but there are some key differences. So, I know a lot of you, I've mentioned my fantasy journal. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago and how I use it. I basically date in my notebook, something like this. This is where all my, initial notes and my schedule for my podcast and everything are. But I would have another one dedicated for my fantasy journal. And if I were using it tonight, I would start fresh November 30th and recap the month and be very positive about, this happened this month and this happened this month. And, well, this didn't happen, but I did get the ball rolling and, whatever. Is not maladaptive to me because I give myself the permission and the time to do that and turn it around and use it as a tool. We'll go into that a little bit, so bear with me. So what is maladaptive daydreaming then? Well, it describes an intensive, vivid, and often compulsive fantasy activity that interferes with daily functioning. Mine doesn't. And thus replacing normal engagement with real life and causing distress. My I wouldn't say my daydreaming is maladaptive. I don't spend all day working on my fantasy journal. I allow myself an hour. And quite frankly, I get bored of it after a while. So it doesn't consume my day. It doesn't, like I said, I'll explain how I turned it around and am using it as a tool, if you will. So it goes on to say that maladaptive daydreaming is distinct from obsessive rumination and intrusive thoughts, but the concepts are closely connected. Like I said, rumination and intrusive thoughts often form the background mental activity that can spark or fuel prolonged immersive daydreaming. Mind wandering and maladaptive daydreaming may include repetitive, triggering thoughts or unwanted mental images, the same mental pattern seen in obsessive rumination and intrusive thoughts. So when I talked about intrusive thoughts being the constant replay my brain was doing of the trauma event and, certain other aspects to the trauma event, went on for 16 months. Yeah. That is intrusive thoughts. But that's how maladaptive daydreams. So no matter how positive the daydreams are, it is constantly playing in the back of your mind to the point where you're just not doing the normal things that you should be and want to be doing throughout the day. So there's, it's the same mental pattern there. Only it's expressed in extended story-like fantasies that pull the person further away from reality. So while both maladaptive daydreaming and rumination share repetitive qualities, daydreaming emphasizes elaborate, emotionally satisfying, imagined scenarios, whereas rumination focuses more on repeatedly thinking about distressing topics without any resolution. And there is some research emerging suggested that while maladaptive daydreaming can become problematic and interfere with daily life, the underlying capacity for vivid, immersive fantasy, when understood and managed correctly, aka my fantasy journal work, can offer therapeutic benefits. Maladaptive daydreaming often starts as an adaptive coping strategy for managing stress, trauma, loneliness, or unmet emotional needs. It also can provide temporary mood relief, self-soothing, and opportunities for self-exploration. Some researchers report that interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based techniques, and trauma-focused therapy such as EMDR may help redirect the fantasy process in constructive ways. When approached intentionally, such as through imagery rescripting or creative exercises supervised by a therapist, elements of immersive daydreaming can potentially facilitate healing, enhance emotional awareness, and help process trauma. So, as I said a couple weeks ago, some of the benefits that I have gotten over my fantasy journal tool over the years is, number one, figuring out that I wanted to do a podcast. Number two, figuring out what that podcast should be. Number three, realizing I am just not happy living in Michigan. It's a beautiful state. The people are friendly enough, but with the people, it's just not my vibe. I want to move back to California. My fantasy journal has helped me figure those kinds of things out. And that's what this is talking about, is when you can harness your maladaptive daydreaming into a more constructive outlet, such as my fantasy journal, then you can start having some benefits to it. Okay? But on the whole, maladaptive daydreaming is just taking all those things and thinking about this amazing life, but you're not doing anything with it. And that's when it becomes a problem. So, yes, more rigorous studies are needed. This is something that is fairly new. I did not find a lot of information on it about using or altering maladaptive daydreaming into a therapy tool like I've been doing with my fantasy journal. But the early evidence and case reports show that fantasy and imagination, when channeled purposefully, may shift from maladaptive patterns to tools for regulation, creativity, and personal growth, especially when combined with therapy or support for underlying issues like trauma and emotional dysregulation. And this is where I have been doing my best to turn the maladaptive daydreaming into a tool to help me see what it is I want exactly from my life moving forward. It's also helped me figure out, who I am. Not what I've heard my parents describe me as over the years or anything like that. Just, am I really like this? And start looking for that proof like I did way back when I realized that I wasn't a priority to my father. So why should I give a shit what he says? Maybe he's been wrong about me. If I'm not a priority, then why should I care what he says about me? And if I'm not a priority, chances are he's wrong about me. Maybe I am intelligent. Maybe I do have the wherewithal to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish, despite what I grew up hearing from him my entire life. So it's also helped me figure it out, as I said before, it's helped me figure out what I want to do for my career as far as this podcast, where I want to live, and how I want to live my life in general. Again, my notes go back to the fantasy journal. I'm not going to repeat myself, but I've been able to take what was probably maladaptive at the time and turned it into a tool to help me figure shit out, to help me get some healing without the benefit of a therapist. And basically keep my head above water with a lot of the shit that I've dealt with in my life. Anyway, let's talk about some things that you can do if, like me, you don't have access to proper therapy. Again, as we talked about last week, some stopgap measures to deal with your current situation. So we'll be focusing primarily on obsessive rumination and intrusive thoughts. So we're going to go back to the beginning on this. So real world examples of, oh boy, I messed up my notes. I'm sorry. We're going to go into some real world examples of obsessive rumination. So constantly replaying a social interaction Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I feel so stupid. I can't believe I said that. I wish I could go back and say something different. I know a lot of you have been there. I've been there. Worrying about whether you said something wrong or something you said was misunderstood. Repeatedly thinking about a perceived personal failure or a mistake and unable to move past those feelings of guilt or shame. Obsessively worrying about future events or catastrophes. Imagining worst case scenarios repeatedly. Fixating on relationship conflicts or concerns and endlessly analyzing motives or outcomes without any sort of resolution. That's the key. Is you're just thinking about these things, but you're doing nothing. You're not making any plans in any way, shape, or form to fix the problem. Continual self-criticism about one's abilities or worth and doubting yourself despite any evidence to the contrary. Okay, so now that we know some of the real world examples of that, let's look at some of the strategies that can help you a little bit. Again, see a therapist if you can get into a therapist and access that for yourself. This is not therapy. I'm just sharing with you ideas that can keep your head above water until you can get the proper therapy you need. So, the first strategy is awareness and labeling. Simply noticing and naming when rumination begins can create mental distance and reduce its intensity. So that moment of, oh, I'm thinking about that again. Just notice it. Start there. Just start noticing it. Scheduling worry time. Set aside a specific short period, such as 10 to 15 minutes a day, to focus solely on those worries or repetitive thoughts, rather than letting them intrude at any time. This containment can decrease rumination during other parts of the day. Mindfulness and grounding. Practicing mindfulness meditation or grounding exercises such as breathing exercises, going out and touching some grass or hugging a tree or just going for a walk in nature, or noticing any bodily sensations go inward and, how am I feeling type thing helps redirect your attention away from the rumination and anchors the mind in the present moment, in the here and now. Distraction with an activity. Engaging in physical exercise, creative hobbies, or social interaction, or engaging in social interaction, can interrupt rumination cycles. So, go hang out with a friend, go for a walk. If you knit or crochet, do that. If you play a musical instrument, do that. Do something else, basically. Journaling is always good. Writing down your worries or repeating thoughts to externalize, to get them out of your head. I say that a lot. I just need to get this out of my head. And organize them. Let me start over. Writing down worries or repeating thoughts to externalize and organize them may help reduce their intensity and help bring you some clarity. And then cognitive reframing. So trying to challenge or reframe that negative thought by asking questions such as, is this based on fact? Is there proof of this? Or is this out of fear? Or what evidence do I have that I'm worrying for nothing? If that makes sense. Now, as for the intrusive thoughts, we're going to go through the real world examples. And then we'll get some tips to help you with that. So some of the real world examples of intrusive thoughts are sudden, unwanted images or ideas of harm coming to oneself or loved ones, despite no desire or intention to act on them. Repetitive, distressing doubts about whether a door was locked or an appliance was turned off. Unexpected, inappropriate thoughts or urges that contradict personal values, such as aggressive or blasphemous ideas. Yeah, this one has been very difficult for me in recent months, if you will. Just some of the videos that I see on TikTok, it's like if that person were in front of me, I would have a very difficult time not to refrain from, slapping them across the face and yelling at them and, I would never act on something like that, only in self-defense. But I think about those things a lot. It's okay to think about those things. Sometimes, don't, when it's all the time, intrusive thoughts, that's when it becomes a problem. But understanding, I think that this is, these are normal things under your current circumstances also helps. But we'll get into that more in a little bit. So the unexpected, inappropriate thoughts or urges that contradict your personal values, such as aggressive or blasphemous ideas. Just want to walk up and smack the crap out of somebody. Intrusive memories or flashbacks of traumatic events that arise involuntarily and cause distress. Yes, that is what I was talking about with the intrusive thoughts. And my brain for 16 fucking months, despite asking for help from 3 mental health providers and my own doctor in that 16-month period. Yeah. Unwelcome repetitive questions or worries about contamination or safety. And this is common in OCD-related intrusive thoughts. So here are some self-help strategies that should be able to help you with that. Acceptance and non-judgment. As I was saying, all of these things under the circumstances are perfectly normal. But they do need to be dealt with. Anyway, acceptance and non-judgment. Recognize that intrusive thoughts are involuntary and common, and try to observe them without judgment or self-criticism, reducing their emotional power. Mindfulness techniques. Again, mindfulness meditation to focus attention and gently redirect the mind away from intrusive thoughts and grounding yourself in the present moment. Thought labeling. Mentally label the intrusive thought as just a thought to create distance and reduce its influence. Distraction. We talked about that with the obsessive rumination. Engaging in activities that fully occupy the mind, such as doing puzzles, exercise, hobbies, anything enjoyable to you that will interrupt the intrusive thought cycle. Limit suppression attempts. Trying to forcibly suppress intrusive thoughts often makes them more persistent. Acknowledging acknowledging their presence without struggle can be more effective. And then, of course, journaling. Write down these intrusive thoughts. Getting it out of your head can help provide clarity and reducing their intensity over time. So, again, here is where I want to remind you that I am not a psychologist yet, and therefore I highly encourage you to seek out professional help with a mental health provider as soon as you possibly can, if this all resonates with you. Okay, the ideas that I gave you are the stopgap measure. For example, I'm in a situation where, yes, I have Medicaid, but where I live in Michigan, all I have been hearing for over a year now is, I'm sorry, we're not taking any new Medicaid patients. I do not have the ability to drive to someplace bigger, Lansing, Detroit, Ann Arbor to get the mental health help I need, nor do I have the money to sign up for something like BetterHelp. So I kind of have to find a way to keep my head above water myself until I can get to a therapist. Okay, and that's where these self-help techniques can help you, and I want you to think about them like that. So don't take this as therapy by any stretch of the imagination. These are just ideas. A lot of them I have used myself. I use journaling a lot. I'm seeing a lot of people finding community on TikTok, especially with the format that TikTok has. Just using it as their own personal vlog and just talking to the camera like I'm doing on this podcast with a lot of things. These are just stopgap, okay? And I just want to make it clear that I am sharing with you the things that I am finding that I will be trying myself if I haven't been already. Like I said, some of these I've been using and doing, and they have been helping me just keep my head above the water. That is our goal here, okay? Is to keep your head above water until you can get into proper therapy, all right? I feel like in this day and age, I cannot emphasize this enough because there are so many fake people out there. They take one psychology class and they're the type of people, oh, well, I know all about psychology. I am not like that. I want to be very transparent with all of you. I am not a psychologist. I don't have the PhD. I don't have the licensing. I don't have any of that yet. I do have a bachelor's degree, and as I have said many times, at a bachelor's degree, I do have a certain amount of knowledge, but more importantly, because I only graduated like 3 years ago, proper references is still drilled into my head, and I'm not going to get out of it. So as a bachelor degree student, I have the knowledge, and I know, I have the base knowledge, and I know where to go for the proper information to give to you. Okay, you will never hear me say, at least until I have my PhD, you will never hear me say that I'm a therapist. Okay, we are keeping our head above water here, folks. So, unlike last week's lengthy episode, that's going to do it for us this week. Again, there wasn't much that I resonated with, but I did like the idea of the intrusive thoughts and the obsessive rumination and our discussion on maladaptive daydreaming this week. Because of the idea of how Tom Riddle preserved that memory in the diary that Harry witnessed. Okay, so that does it for us this week. Next week, things are getting good in our story. So if you're new to Harry Potter, things we're kind of hitting that apex of, the final showdown, if you will. Next week, we're going to be discussing chapter 14, Cornelius Fudge. Until then, be wary of finding rogue objects at Hogwarts, because we all know that anything you find at Hogwarts, nothing is as it seems. So be careful. Until then, we'll see you next week.